Good evening. I'm Andy Evans. In tonight's episode, I'd like to talk about my top 10 horror reads, novels that have influenced me in various ways over the years. Okay, in reverse order, we have at number 10, Domain by James Herbert. The third in the late James Herbert's Rats trilogy. This one takes the problem of rats to an entirely new level. Following a nuclear war, we humans are no longer the dominant species on the earth. Mutant rats are. This is a long, epic book, and Herbert is a master at his craft. At times, his description is so graphic that I wanted to turn away from the page. But I couldn't. I was compelled to keep reading. I grew up on Herbert, and this one's a goodie. Number 9, The Deep by Nick Cutter. In search of a cure for the Gets, an unusual worldwide pandemic, Dr. Luke Nelson must descend into the Marianas Trench, to the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, to a special research lab where his estranged brother is conducting groundbreaking research. And there he must face an evil much blacker than the depths itself. This is a tense book. As we descend in the submarine, the fear is palpable. The great weight of water pressing down from above. The claustrophobia. The walls feel paper thin. Nick Cutter, whose real name is Craig Davidson, has a rare gift as a storyteller. He did it with The Troop, and he does it again here with The Deep. Number 8, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. You know this story, right? A stranger, Griffin, turns up at a local inn in a snowstorm, wrapped up from head to toe, even his face covered with bandages, and he's got a fake nose. He stays at the inn and he demands to be left alone, a recluse who soon becomes the talk of the village. Griffin is a scientist who's discovered how to change the body's refractive index, and in desperation he's experimented on himself and made himself invisible. Things quickly turn ugly. The Invisible Man commits murder. He's become deranged and describes a reign of terror he will visit upon the nation. He has to be stopped. This is a sci-fi horror classic. It speaks of the darkness in the human heart. It resonates truth, even over 100 years after it was published. Number 7, The Ruins by Scott Smith. Well, some have criticised this book for its far from likeable protagonists. I didn't have any issue with this. This is a uniquely eerie story. A horror buried deep in a Mexican jungle that literally consumes 6 unsuspecting tourists. The moral of this story is simple. Ignore the warnings at your peril. Number 6, House of Leaves by Mark Danielowski. How can I describe this story? This is one book you can't read on a Kindle. The paperback itself is a work of art. The text, like the story, spreads out in all directions. At times you even have to turn the book upside down in order to read it. There are a number of narrative threads. At times the story is told in footnotes, and often there's stories within stories, but most notably the weird goings on in the Navidson record documentary. There's a closet in the Navidson family home with strange, seemingly infinite dimensions. The exploration into this weird space, down, 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 into this maze-like complex, all of it captured in video and photographs. This is certainly a horror story, but maybe it's also a love story. The book is an experience, much like listening to a Radiohead album and just letting your mind wander. And I'm a huge Radiohead fan. Number 5, Twilight Eyes by Dean Koontz. They look like people, but they're goblins. Murderous goblins. Predators. You've got to kill them before they kill you. Slim Mackenzie is one of only a few who can see them. He joins the carnival to support himself while continuing his mission to kill goblins. This novel is brutal. At its core, it's a heart-pounding thriller with horror elements. But on a deeper level, it talks about them and us, and the thin veil of what's acceptable behaviour within civilized society. I've enjoyed many of Dean Koontz's novels, particularly his early works, and this is him at his most inspired. Number 4, Dracula by Bram Stoker. The original Gothic horror story. Count Dracula, Renwick, Jonathan Harker, Mina, Lucy, Van Helsing. We know these characters. The notion of such a creature as a vampire is sheer brilliance, playing to our most primal fears. I've read this book several times, and while it doesn't have the pacing of a modern novel, it has never failed to get under my skin. Scary stuff. Dracula's Guest is also well worth a read. Number 3, Abominable by Dan Simmons. What would it be like to climb Mount Everest? In this book you get to feel just that, only the attempt is set back in the mid-1920s. Simmons skillfully intertwines historical fiction with horror, and soon there's a growing body count. But these victims aren't victims of the mountain itself, or the savage cold, or even the notorious death zone at the uppermost altitudes. They've been eviscerated, and now someone, or something, is pursuing the small group of climbers on the roof of the world. Could it be the abominable snowman? Another honourable mention is for The Terror, also by Dan Simmons. Number 2, The Passage by Justin Cronin. The first in Justin Cronin's Passage trilogy. All 3 are must-reads, but this one is the best in my opinion. This is a clever rethinking of the vampire legend. Meet the virals, or rather, you don't want to meet the virals. More importantly, you're going to meet a whole plethora of people. This is fiction on an epic post-apocalyptic scale. Among them are Brad Woolgast and Amy Belafonte, whose father-daughter bond spans an entire century unbroken. Cronin's prose is lyrical and a sheer pleasure to read. The world he's created is immersive and all-consuming. His characters are, to me, like family members. And number 1 is It by Stephen King. Stephen King is truly a master of the genre. He took something like a clown and turned it into the monster of our darkest nightmares. Let's face it, aren't we all a little scared of clowns? If you're not, you will be after reading this epic book. Of course, Pennywise the Dancing Clown is only one of the monster's guises. There are others, each fashioned to the victim's greatest fear. There is a shape-shifting, ancient evil buried under the town of Derry, Maine. Yet, for all its horror, and there's lots of horror, this is really a novel about childhood. It feels like it's about my childhood. I was totally invested in the lives of the children, and then the adults of the Losers Club. I read this book when I was in my teens, and it blew my mind. More than any other book, it's responsible for a lifelong love of reading and of the horror genre itself. Some have criticised the book's prose for its excessive wandering off on tangents, but I like to think this was a stylistic choice, to try to capture the feel of small town gossip.